My name is Laurel Kadouri. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was born into a very Zionist, pro-Israel family from the get-go. What led me to Israel was when I was 12 years old, I already knew that I wanted to go. And I was having my bat mitzvah, my 12-year celebration into taking on the responsibilities of being a female adult. And I asked my parents if I could do the celebration in Israel. And I remember reading at the pulpit in Hebrew and looking out into the audience. And I knew that one day when I was older, I would immigrate to Israel. When I hit college, I finally had my independence. And I said, I'm going to Israel. I was a junior. I went to Tel Aviv University, and I then continued on to a school called Machon Wingate. My sister was living there in an absorption center. It was called Merkaz Klita in Gilo. And in Merkaz Klita Gilo, there were, in 1985, it was Operation Moshe, Operation Moses, with the Ethiopians. There were 8,000 Ethiopians that had just been airlifted in about 2 to 3 months in over 30 flights. And I had a camera. I was taking pictures of them. They never saw a camera. We were cooking on a stove. They never saw what a stove was. So I was with all these beautiful children, and it was a culture shock because they were coming from a nomadic land, and I was coming from the United States of America. My clothes were fancy, my belongings were fancy, and they had absolutely nothing. And we became friends, and it led me down a path through the years to actually help the Ethiopian Jews out. I still hadn't officially made Aliyah. I still hadn't officially immigrated. I was on a tourist status. I went back to the United States, and I received my master's degree in neurobiology and physiology. And the Gulf War broke out in 1991. I was planning on officially changing my status in August of 1991, but on January 14th, the war broke out, and within 24 hours, I decided everyone's flying out of Israel, Saddam Hussein is bombing, and I am flying out to Israel. And one of the biggest changes I saw throughout the years was that each of these groups came somewhat isolated from their countries. They still kept their identity as Ethiopian Jews or as Jews from Holland or Jews from Poland. And yet the Jewish community had so many things in common. Some of the customs were different, but the belief systems and the traditions were all the same, and it was quite a feeling of a strong identity and cultural awareness and a feeling of something greater than the single person. It was a feeling of a people and a feeling of a connection to years, ancient years gone by, a bead in the chain of, or a link in the chain of history.
My name is Al Ben-Ness. I was 14 years old when I joined the underground movement in Iraq, the Zionist underground movement, which is not by law. God forbid if they will catch us over there, there is only one way for us punishment, to hang them up. And they did. Okay, 14 years I was there. After 2 years I became instructor. But here we came to start organizing ourselves to defend ourselves in case if something pogrom will happen to us as well as it happened in 1941. In 1949, the things are broken down. The police, the Iraqi police, captured 4 of our members, and they, after torturing them to a point where they have to open up and tell them exactly who they are and whom they know. And so the list was very big, they gave. And on the list, I was my name over there. Okay, so at night, and one night in October, somebody rang the door and told me, Al, you got to pack up and leave the house. And that's a point where from there, after hiding also about 10 days or so, we got together with another 9 people. I was altogether 10 people. We left walking at night. It's along 7 nights. We walked through the rugged mountains of Iraq, crossing the border towards Iran. So by the time we crossed Iran, we gave up ourselves to the police office over there. And because the Shah those days was a pro-Western, and he helped us in any way that we wanted. They took us, in Israel, they created a big camp absorbance center for all immigrants coming from all over the world, whether from Europe or the Middle East, whatever it is. They call it Shar Aliyah near Haifa. So we went to Jaffa. From Jaffa, we start looking for jobs. And at that time, the intelligence department of the army, of the Israeli army, was looking for people like us because we know a lot of Baghdad and a lot of Iraq and everything. Being that I know those 3 languages over there, they need me over there very much. So I was interrogating the all infiltrators coming from Gaza or Hebron, and I was sitting together with the United Nations officers, together with the officers of coming from Hebron, from Jordan, and the Israeli as well, translating it from Arabic to Hebrew, Hebrew to Arabic, Arabic, English, Hebrew. Today, when I go to Israel and I see all my friends, the people that I worked with them all those years together, they are well adjusted. They have their homes, as big as these homes sometimes, or maybe better. I have pictures over there I took, and you cannot believe it. The highways, the buildings, the high-rise buildings. I mean, this time, I was just this year over there for almost a month over there in Israel. I mean, you're walking between Ra'anana and Herzliya and Tel Aviv and everything. Wherever you move, you see the crane hanging in the air, new buildings coming up. And we have in Israel, when you walk in the street, you feel you're at home. This is your country. This is your language. This is your life here. It's wonderful, wonderful.
My name is Hannah Scheff. I am a Holocaust survivor. I was born in Russia. We spent, the first 6 years of my life was spent in Siberia. From 46 to 49, we lived in Germany. In 1949, we came to America. My mother's family went to Israel. My father's family came here. And my desire always was to go to Israel to visit the family. In 1967, I took my first trip with Stanley, with my husband, to see my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. And Stanley and I fell in love with the country, and that's all we talked about was one day making Aliyah. The opportunity arose in 1971.
Are we doing the right thing? We've left everyone behind, our friends, the children's friends, everyone. Will Israel be good for the kids? Wish I felt as happy as I'm trying to look for their sake. I feel so alone and far away from everything. Why am I so worried? This is Israel.
We lived in Merkaz Klita in Beersheba, which is desert. And coming from America and living the way we lived for 6 months was hell, to put it mildly. The 4 kids loved it, as kids usually do. They have no responsibilities. Everything is fun and picnics and barbecues and everything. They loved it. But Stan and I had a very difficult time adjusting, especially coming from the kind of life from Potomac, Maryland. We just couldn't adjust to the life there. In 1973, when the Yom Kippur War broke out, Stanley was in America and I was alone with the 4 kids. That was an experience that I will never forget because we had no idea that there was a war coming. And when the sirens went off, we had no idea what to do. One of my neighbors knocked on the door and she said, "You have to run to the shelter." So here we were. We ran to the shelter. We didn't know we had to take water or food because we had no idea how long we were going to be there. And after a few hours, we went back upstairs. But from that point on, I knew to be prepared at all times. I think that if we had made Aliyah after the Yom Kippur War instead of before the Yom Kippur War, life might have been a little bit easier because in 71, the Americans really were not welcome. Most of the people that made Aliyah were from Russia or Ethiopia, from all the different Middle Eastern countries, but there were very, very few Americans that came at that time. So our life was very difficult. But we go back constantly. We love the country. And as I said, things are totally different today than they were back in 1971. Americans are more welcome. Life is easier. It's just a whole different picture today than it was then.
My name is Paul Jacobs, locally known as Doc because I'm an orthopedic surgeon, born at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, which no longer exists, went to Tilden High School, which no longer exists, was a rabid fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who no longer exist, and I left New York and moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My first experience in Israel was in 1971, the Hospital for Joint Disease for a couple of years had started a rotation program where an alumni went to Israel for a month to Hadassah Hospital, which we had close relations to, and basically was there for teaching, did some work and lived at the hospital and spent 5 weeks there. It was a wonderful experience. It's from a hospital standpoint, it's really probably the only major hospital within 1,000, 2,000 miles in any direction. And my next experience was after the Yom Kippur War. In wartime, all of the doctors get mobilized, and most of them get taken away to their units, so the hospital is really short-staffed. I was called upon on short notice to ask if I would go because I wouldn't need orientation. They wouldn't have to show me around or anything. They knew me and I knew them. We took the 4 girls and my wife and we went, lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Rahavia section of Israel, of Jerusalem. And we really became true Jerusalemites, could walk anywhere, knew everything and knew everybody. The medical care, as I said, in Jerusalem, there are 2 hospitals basically, and both are very well equipped, and Hadassah is the most modern hospital in the whole area by far. And they remain up to date. The new building, of course, is fantastic, and nothing but good things to say about it. Medically, personally, the care is phenomenal. There is nothing that we do in America that they don't do in Jerusalem. It's an amazing place. One of the big changes that I noticed was that on our first trip, almost everybody was either in or related to somebody or had a story relating to the War of Independence. This was something that was very close. When you go there today, you realize that anybody under the age of 65 or 70 doesn't remember a world without Israel. And those of us who do remember it, it's just a very emotional thing that to know that after 2,000 years, we're back having a country.
My name is Haviva, born in Israel. Israel at the very beginning. So when we were growing up, there were a lot of immigrants coming. Israel was suffering. Everything was rationed. We live in a small town that was under 10,000 people living there. And it was a farming land. We did a lot of farming, chicken, whatever grew. So we had to make do. Thank God, my father always said we were not the poorest, and I should be grateful because we're not the immigrants who lives in tent. And I was jealous of the immigrants who lived in tent because they had a lot of friends and we had a lot of land and there were no people and I had no one to play with. I'm one of 6, and we lived in you would call it a shack today. But at that time, we're not in a tent, so we were pretty good. We had an outhouse. I never went to the army. I was married at the age of 17, just before. We were lucky later on. We were trying to build a home, and every time saving few pennies to put the next cornerstone in that home. And we're finally seeing that we're getting out of that shack, and the foundation is there. And one day, the creek where the water flies from all the orange orchid. There were all orange orchids all over the place. And the house was flooded. The whole house was flooded. The foundation for the house were gone, was covered. We were sleeping over neighbors' houses. Israel is amazing today. If anyone grew up at those years, it was like a wow country. Then and now, wow. Of course, we did get to rebuild the house and got electricity. In fact, we were 6 siblings after twins were born when I was 7. And I remember them being born and we couldn't yet afford to put the floor in that new house that we built. And I remember my mother, who was meticulous. How can a meticulous woman live in this condition is beyond me. And she would put the cribs in tin cans of kerosene. Each leg of the crib, she says, so ant would not crawl up to the bed and bite the babies. This was the beginning years. Those are stories that probably no one would ever hear. This was the beginning. Those are the pioneers of Israel that built this country. The culture, the advancement, the open-mindedness of the people, the continuing seeking to change and grow and get ahead. It is a phenomenon, in spite of the war, in spite of being aimed out continuously. These people, I've never seen people who could be so happy all the time. The cafes are full of people. They're always happy. Oh, I'm sorry, Israel is my first love. I have an obligation to the United States that have given me a wonderful life. But Israel is my first love. It really is. I really wish the world would see, truly, avoid the media, truly go to Israel and look at this country. And look what these people do in spite of the challenges they have to go through. Instead of crying and feeling victimized, they get up as feeling like innovators and winners. And this is, I still think I should be there.